Terrific. Good morning. We are together, Reverend Taylor in North Carolina, I assume, and and I am here in Washington, D.C. It is just a little after 9 a.m. in the morning, Eastern Daylight Time, on the 6th of October in 2022. This is for the purpose of answering questions and Reverend Taylor to answer questions that I propound on behalf of the African American Episcopal Historical Collection, which is a joint project of the Historical Society of the Episcopal Church and the Bishop Payne Library of Virginia Theological Seminary. So Reverend Taylor, could you tell us where you are now and how you find, how long you've been there and how you find it to be?
Honored to be a part of this conversation. So I'm currently the rector of St. Ambrose Episcopal Church in Southeast Raleigh. Last Sunday, I celebrated a decade, 10 years at St. Ambrose. The church really surprised me with a wonderful decade celebration with a worship service led by the priest who is really responsible for my being a priest, the Reverend Dr. Wilberforce Mundia from Kenya, and presented me with several gifts, including Ethiopian cope, chasuble, stole, lightweight, chasuble stole, and a commissioned Ethiopian icon that's 11 inches by 14 inches of the Holy Family. Wow. Since I've been a father, which is now for 3 years, the image of the Holy Family has had a deeper meaning for me. And then there was special music, and we went to St. Augustine's Student Union, the MLK Center there, for a nice banquet where they presented my family and me with a vacation and year subscription to free entry to the zoos and museums, kids museums up and down the East Coast, and even gave a spa day for my spouse, my wife, and presented us with flowers. So wonderful, wonderful celebration. My mother has this phrase, give people flowers while they live. And I felt like I got my flowers Sunday. It was also a unique opportunity for me to worship with my family in the church I serve. I've been a priest almost 15 years. I've never had that opportunity. I've never worshiped in the pew with my family in the church where I serve. And I was able to do that Sunday. So wonderfully blessed. But a little bit about St. Ambrose. St. Ambrose was founded in 1868, right after the end of the Civil War, for people of African ancestry, founded by the same person, Father Smith, who founded St. Augustine's University, founded university to educate those recently emancipated people of African descent, formerly enslaved, and then founded the church, St. Augustine's, St. Ambrose, for spiritual formation. We began in a neighborhood called Smoky Hollow. This is where freed Black people lived during the institution of slavery.
Was St. Ambrose considered the university, the college church?
Yeah, so you asked the right question. So technically it's St. Augustine, St. Ambrose. And so and it's a unique in founding. So when the university was founded, the chapel, which was St. Augustine's Chapel, was founded as a chapel for the students, but also the larger community. Now, the chapel itself was not on campus. The chapel was a mile west of campus in this neighborhood called Smoky Hollow, which is where freed Black people live. But to go really around the naming. So St. Augustine's University is founded. St. Augustine's Chapel is associated with the university, but geographically separate. And that remained the case until 1895, when then Archbishop Henry Beard Delaney, Archbishop for Colored Work, later Bishop Delaney, when Bishop, I guess it was Atkinson, or Cheshire, right. Excuse me, Bishop Cheshire, right. Wanted him to build a chapel on campus. And so he built with rocks quarried from the university's site, that stone chapel that exists today. And so when the chapel was built, it was the first official chapel on campus. The bishop says, well, now there are two churches and one named St. Augustine. So let's change. And so what was formerly called St. Augustine's Chapel became St. Ambrose Episcopal Church, or officially the Episcopal Church of St. Ambrose. And there's historical ties. Ambrose converted Augustine. And then the newly constructed chapel that Archdeacon Delaney built, that became the chapel at St. Augustine's. And what makes that designation unique is that the university is a mission of the larger Episcopal Church. The chapel is parochially is considered part of the diocese. And so the chapel, because when Bishop Cheshire founded it, he had a vision of the chapel serving just not the college campus, but also the larger community. So the priest there is both dean of the chapel and vicar of the congregation. But that's the naming. And so in the beginning, what eventually became St. Ambrose has its genesis as St. Augustine's Chapel. That line is clear. And then the break or the parting comes when the new chapel is built with a new vision of not only serving the college campus, but the larger community.
And the St. Augustine's University now have its own chapel?
Yeah, so in 1895, the stone chapel that Delaney built became the university chapel, which is still the chapel today. Okay,
all right. And yeah, we know about Bishop Delaney.
Yeah, of course.
And his daughters.
Right, and his great-granddaughter and great-great-granddaughter are still members and active at St. Ambrose. As a matter of fact, his great-great-granddaughter is clerk of the vestry.
Oh, is that right? That is wonderful.
It is wonderful.
And do you have assisting clergy at St. Ambrose?
Since I have been there since 2012, the majority of the time we have had assisting clergy. We do not currently have assisting clergy. The clergy we have had is the Reverend Nita Bird, who's now chaplain at Hobart and Smith. And then we had the Reverend Joyce Corbin Cunningham.
I know Joyce.
Who is now, she's a graduate of Virginia and is now at Church of the Good Shepherd downtown Raleigh.
I see. I want to get back to your connection to the Kenyan minister in a minute, but can we go all the way back and talk about your childhood?
Okay.
And I think, of course, answer it any way you want. But one of the things I think we try to trace is the beginning hankerings, longings for closeness to God and the tug of the Holy Spirit in terms of your call, your ultimate call. Talk to me about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lewisburg, North Carolina, which is the next county over from Wake County, Franklin County. It's about an hour northeast of Raleigh. I grew up on land that my father's family has inhabited since at least 1790. So for 75 years as enslaved African, enslaved Black people. And then since then, as people emancipated, quote unquote. So we tell the story in my family of Grandpa Dodd. This would be my great-great-grandfather. His name was Dodd Thomas. He was born 1834. He was an enslaved person on the plantation of North Carolina General Assembly member John Thomas. John Thomas also fought in the Confederacy. And so at the end of the Civil War—
And is this on your mother's side?
This is on my father's side. This is on my father's side. This is my paternal side.
Okay.
And we tell the story, we call Grandpa Dodd renegade, because at the end of the Civil War, he went to John Thomas and wanted to buy 15 acres of land.
Mhm.
It still baffles us how anybody who was enslaved could even make money, let alone save money to buy land. And so John Thomas sold Grandpa Dodd 15 acres of land. And from then, generations following purchased more and more land. The slave cabin that Grandpa Dodd lived in stood on my family's property until about the year 2000. So as a child, I remember playing around this slave cabin, just wondering how in the world did he live here on a dirt floor in this little wooden cabin, let alone raise family, let alone amass money to buy more and more land.
And what year did he acquire the land?
I would have been 1866.
1866.
1866.
Just after the close of the Civil War.
Just after the close. And then, we have deeds and paperwork showing purchases in 1870s, 1880s, 1900s, even as late as 1937. Now, of course, this not be Dodd Thomas, but his descendants purchasing land.
Purchasing additional land.
Purchasing so they amassed. So
adjacent to the land.
Yeah, so it's all, and so it's all, So now the parcels, when you add up, are certainly larger than 15 acres, but we can see the progression. And really the one driving this was his son, Jordan, as he was called Jordan, because that was a pronunciation.
Mm-hmm.
Then Jordan Thomas was the one who was born 1880, who really took it to the next level. I mean, he's the one who purchased tens of acres to grow the farm. And so prolific was this individual that Jordan is the most common family name. And I named my son, who is now 1 year old, Caleb Jordan Taylor. Caleb after King Caleb of Ethiopia, that great Aksumite 6th century king, later saint, the only saint, African saint recognized by the Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox churches, as well as Ethiopian Church. So his name is Caleb, and then his middle name is Jordan, after Jordan Thomas, his great grandfather.
And tell me about the name Jemonde.
Jemonde. So Jemonde is a French name. For years, I thought my father named me Jemonde because my father was a French teacher, French professor. Mm-hmm. And then I learned as an adult, actually, it's my mother who named me Jemonde. So my father, who went to St. Augustine's University, double majored in English and French, but my mother also was a French major in college. And so she made it up. It simply means worldly, je and then monde. When I used to work for Michelin Tire Company, which is a French company. Yeah. And so I spent some time in Clermont-Ferrand in France. And people, when they just saw my name, they thought it was French because, the Le Monde is the newspaper there. Yes. Jemonde, just I world or worldly. And my first name was Robert. So Robert after my father, and Jemonde, my middle name. So, but you go but you prefer going by Jemonde? Jemonde, yeah, I've gone by Jemonde my whole life.
Okay, and how is your French?
It's non-existent. It was better as a child.
Because it was spoken.
My father spoke a little bit and taught us some phrases. And then when I lived in France for a bit, it got better. And working with the French, it got better. But it was nowhere near as good as my father's French.
And what were the years that you were growing up on that land?
Yeah, so you asked me about the land and connection. So the land in our family is personified. I mean, it is a person. We speak about the land as if the land were a person, because the land is a person. The land holds the graves of the ancestors. As an aside, earlier this year in June, I was on the property and I discovered a slave cemetery. We did not know this cemetery existed. And right now we're working to get it on the National Register of Slave Cemeteries. But yeah, so the land it's a person, it's personified. It's almost like this Native American way of viewing the land. And so as a child, my father would take me on nature walks, and we would go through the woods. And I remember asking my dad, if Ronald Reagan is president of the United States is God president of the world? And my dad would say, yeah, I think you're right. And so this love of nature, God and nature, is my father who would first taught me about astronomy, who would point out the moon, and the first star you see in the night sky is actually Venus. It's the brightest planet. And we would do constellations, and we would go to our family cemetery, which is on the property, because there's very little light pollution, and watch meteor showers. And so my early connection with the divine was through nature. That was on one side. The other side was this connection to God through music and scripture. So my family tells the story that when I was 6 months old, I started kind of repeating back jingles. And by the time I was 18 months, I was able to sing Malat's Lord's Prayer. And by the time I'm 4, and we have audio and video of this, I was traveling through North Carolina, Virginia, and South Carolina, giving 1-hour concerts and recitations, concerts on semi-classical music, classical and Negro spirituals, and then recitations of scripture and works by Paul Laurence Dunbar, Mary McLeod Bethune, King's I Have a Dream speech, even Robert Frost and Edgar Allan Poe. And so my formative years were love of God in nature and love of God through word and song. And so I really have to credit my father with exploring the why, because I asked why a lot, very inquisitive, and really planting those seeds that later grew into, I would say, the priest and the faith I have now. Now, on my mother's side, so I grew up in an ecumenical family. My father is Episcopalian, of blessed memory. My father passed last May of 2021. My mother's still living. Thank you for that. And my mother is Baptist. And so I grew up in both churches. So we have, to get back to Mundian, the reason I'm a priest, or one of the reasons he's a priest, I'm a priest because
before you go there, I just want to get one fact in. The years that you were growing up and taking those nature walks. You mentioned Ronald Reagan. Were you a boy at the time of Ronald Reagan's being in the White House? What year were you born?
So I was born in 1977. And so I remember being, I guess it would be pre-K or daycare, doing a mock election. And I actually remember going into the election booth with my father, voting, I guess with the 1980 election, my father telling me, I vote and you vote because my mother, your grandmother, could not vote. And so he said, you always vote. And that's to this day. Anytime there's an election, I vote because I know my grandparents could not vote. So yeah, I was in 1980. Certainly, I would have remembered Reagan.
Okay. And so you're going to talk about your Kenyan connection there for a second.
Kenyan connection. So I was ecumenical family. When I was born, my father was active at St. Matthias Episcopal Church in Lewisburg. Lewisburg, like many towns, have 2 Episcopal churches, one historically white and one historically black. The white church founded in 1845, and then St. Matthias founded in 1893. And the story goes that when Archbishop Henry Delaney was a professor at St. Augustine's, he heard of a rumor of there being one Black Episcopalian in all of Franklin County. So he boarded the train on Friday after school, after lectures, took the train to Lewisburg, hopped off, and spent the weekend there. And he would walk around knocking on doors saying, hello, I'm the Reverend Delaney. Do you need prayer? Does anybody need to be buried? Do people need to be married? And from that one individual, he grew a congregation, St. Matthias, that at one time had the largest parochial school in the entire state of North Carolina. We're talking 400 Black students.
Wow.
And so that's the genesis of that church. So I grew up in a historically Black church. But since about the 1950s, St. Matthias became yoked with St. Paul's. Actually, to be correct, it was 1965 that both churches became yoked, whereas the rector of St. Paul's white church would become the vicar of St. Matthias. And St. Matthias had no say in calling the rector at St. Paul's. And so when I was born, my parents had a discussion around Christian formation. And my mother was a member of a pretty large Black Baptist church, probably 300 members. And they decided that the Christian formation, because St. Matthias was such a small church, actually, I would have been the only child in the church at that time.
I see. That
Christian formation should be done in the Baptist church because they did not want to send me to St. Paul's. Because my father had dealings with St. Paul's. And at that time, St. Paul's had in its bylaws that no Black person can be a member of this congregation and that no Black person can worship in this church. And so this was, we're talking about 1977, 1980. This is not that long ago. But and those bylaws existed until 1995 when the church revised the bylaws. And so for that reason, my spiritual formation was heavily done at Pleasant Grove Baptist Church, a missionary Baptist church in Hollister, North Carolina. And so all of my childhood, the man standing at the altar or the priest standing at the altar was a white man. I remember Father Tom Finkster. Father Tom Finkster played for the Buffalo Bills. He stood 6 feet 8 inches tall. When he genuflected, I thought God came from heaven down and went back up. I mean, incredibly tall man. And so all of my childhood, white men at the altar, white men at the altar. And then as a senior in college, I see Wilberforce Mundia standing at the altar of this Black church. And it was the first time in my life. Excuse me?
Where?
At St. Matthias's.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, it's first time. He was the first Black priest I ever met was Tom Logan, the younger, who was chaplain at St. Augustine's. But
we have his papers.
Yeah. But the first Black priest I ever saw serve at St. Matthias's was Wilberforce Mundia. And I remember thinking, if he can do that, I can do that. And so that was another mark in ordained ministry. To go back to maybe start the story and then move it forward, I would say I got a call to ministry when I was 7 years old. When I was 7 years old, a high school senior came up to me and said, "You're going to be a minister one day." And it scared the daylights out of me because my first thought
Girl
was,
or boy? It
was a boy. It was a high school senior, 18-year-old.
Okay.
And when he said it, my first thought was, I don't want to be a minister because ministers have bad kids and I want good kids. I vividly remember thinking that. And so that planted a seed. And along the way, I thought about ministry, but not seriously. Can you put a pin in that
for just 1 second?
Yes.
Why do you think he said that to you?
That's a good question. This was not really a church going guy. This guy ran the streets and did all sorts of things. My guess is he did it because he saw me doing these recitations in church. But many people saw me do recitations in church, and he was only one at that time to say anything about it. And so that was planted the early seed of thought, and then seeing Father Mundia at the altar. I thought, it was incarnational. If you can't see it, you can't be it. And so I saw him. And so he was the one who preached and led worship at my 10th anniversary service at St. Ambrose just 2 weeks ago. It was very powerful to have it come full circle.
How old is he now?
He is probably in his late 60s, early 70s.
I see. Okay.
His father was the first Kenyan bishop of the Diocese of Western Kenya, Maseno. All the bishops before him were British. And then Bishop Mundia was the first native.
Wow. So do you think, and you said you first thought of that message from the roustabout in the neighborhood as the first inkling of a call?
Yeah, it was the first inkling of a call. And
did you talk about it?
No, I didn't. I don't even think I shared that story with my parents. It's only And to be quite honest, it wasn't until I was writing my spiritual autobiography, when I was in the discernment process, that I remembered that story.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's powerful testimony. Did it surprise you? Did it surprise your family that you ultimately developed an interest in being an ordained minister?
Not at all. I remember when I told my father, it was 2005. We actually were playing golf at that time, which was one of 5 Black-owned golf courses in the West, Bull Creek in Franklin County. That golf course has since gone under and is now a park. But we're on the golf course, and my father said, well, when he graduated St. Augustine's, the president and others wanted him to go into ordained ministry, to be an Episcopal priest. I'd never heard this story. But he said he felt his calling was education, which it was. And so he spent his ministry, his life in education, and then as a very active lay person. My mother at the time, who had broken her foot, had a very severe, actually broken her leg. It was in a cast up to her thigh. I still don't know how she did this, but when I told her that I was in the process and would be going to seminary, sitting on the couch, she leaped to her feet and screamed and said, "I'm so proud of you," and then went and gave me a big hug. So both were very supportive in my call. And what they said is that it made sense, because they'd sensed this for a while. And I have to give it to them that they didn't say anything to me nor try to push it. They let me go my own route. I mean, I'm undergrad engineering, mechanical. Then I went to graduate school, got a degree in robotics and vehicle design, and went in the corporate world working for Michelin. So that was my trajectory. And yet all along the way, there was this longing to do something different. And so they really validated that.
Do you have siblings?
I have 2 younger sisters. Khalees, she lives actually in Alexandria, Virginia, with her husband and 4 children. And then I have a younger sister. Both are younger than I am, but the youngest sister, Tensi, Janine, she lives in Los Angeles and has been in Los Angeles for about 12 years. So it's the 3 of us. Okay.
And does your sister Khalees have a church here in Alexandria?
She does. She goes to a Baptist church. The name escapes me right now.
Alfred Street?
It's not historic Alfred Street. She does visit Alfred Street from time to time, but her primary church, I can look it up. One of the things that impressed me is that they have a large Ethiopian ministry, and Ethiopian Orthodox is something that's very important to me. So she goes to church there, and I think it's a church in Alexandria, but I know it's nearby if it's not Alexandria proper.
Now, I have to stop you there. You offered something. I need to find out what that's about. Ethiopian Orthodox is important to you. How so?
Yeah, I would say I've spent nearly 20 years studying the spirituality and history of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. When I was a senior at NC State in engineering, I took this class by Professor Adler on intertestamental literature, so literature between the Old and New Testament.
Yeah.
And he made one statement that changed my life. He said in his lecture in fall of '99 that Europeans thought the Book of Enoch was a myth until the Portuguese encountered the Ethiopians and found it in their canon. That one statement blew my mind, because up to that point, I did not think any African had anything to teach any European about Christianity.
Wow.
And I also thought that, Ethiopians were like the people I saw on TV growing up. So in the 1980s, Civil War with Eritrea and the famine, Michael Jackson, We Are the World. So to me, an Ethiopian was, a poor African who was malnourished with a large stomach and flies flying around.
Despite Haile Selassie. Oh, because he had gone by the time you were a boy.
Yeah, I'm at that time, I'm trying to think. And if I think as a young man in the early 20s with Haile Selassie was more from the Rastafarian. It was
see.
somehow it was somehow disconnected from the Ethiopian context.
Okay.
And so what I did is I went back to my residence hall room and I did an internet search on Ethiopia and Enoch. And the webpage for St. Mary of Zion Ethiopian Church in DC came up, and it had Mary and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I stared at that for 10 minutes. That is no exaggeration. It was
and is that the church on 16th Street?
It is a church on 16th
Yeah.
Street.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That image, it would be the first authentically African representation I saw of the Holy Family. The other images have been these Leonardo da Vinci's painting
Mm-hmm.
with just brown skin.
Mm-hmm.
They still look European, just a little bit darker.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began researching and saw that Christianity came to Ethiopia, not the European slave traders and colonialists, but really from Jerusalem through either Egypt or through the Arabian Peninsula. And it helped liberate me because I was really questioning my faith at that time, because friends of mine were challenging me, these friends, Nation of Islam, you worship a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. Mm-hmm. That Christianity, this is the slave holders' religion. This is the white man's religion, and you are still embracing the oppression of the enslaver, even though slavery technically is over. So I was really wrestling what it meant to be Black and Christian. And then Ethiopia just opened my spiritual life. And so I call Ethiopia the spiritual home for all African people in diaspora of Abrahamic faith, particularly Christian faith. And so all from 1999 to the present in seminary, I did independent study with an Ethiopian Orthodox priest. To be quite honest, the chief reason I went to General Theological Seminary in New York City was that the Cathedral for the Archdiocese of the Ethiopian Church in North America is in the Bronx. And I did independent study with Ethiopian priests in the Bronx. I took Amharic, took Ge'ez, and anytime I could, whether it was Old Testament, New Testament, anytime I could bend my reports or projects at General to Ethiopian Orthodoxy, I did. I wrote.
And you did your thesis, didn't you, on the African diaspora?
Well, I did. My thesis was on the history of the Black presence at the General Theological Seminary. So I started with the first Black graduate, Father Bishop, who was rector of St. Philip's, Harlem, for 50 years, and his son after it. But it was concentrated on the Black presence at General. But in other courses, I would concentrate on either Ethiopian Orthodoxy. So when I was a seminarian, I wrote a worship service that I still use today. It's an Ethiopian inspired evensong. So I took the Episcopal Church's order for evening worship and adapted it in the Ethiopian tradition. And we use it at St. Ambrose, and really travel around the U.S. leading this worship service. The premise is we use the drone or the hum as a way of everybody participating in the prayer life. Because when I went to Ethiopia on pilgrimage, I've led 2 pilgrimages to Ethiopia for Epiphany. One of the things that amazed me is how transcendence and immanence were present in the worship service. And I think that's the only time, or there have been very few times when I've been in worship where both transcendence and immanence have been present, that the common prayer and the independent, intimate prayer were happening simultaneously and were somehow united. And so the way I came up with mimicking that is by having the people drone, and then I chant in an Ethiopic mode on top of that drone. And
but
so
when you first experienced that, was it liturgically designed, or was it organically present? In other words, did something happen? That's a good question.
I think, I think here again, it's both. Okay. I think it was liturgically designed and spiritually or naturally present. So the 2 instances, I remember being in Ethiopia in 2007 for Epiphany, which is January 19th. We were guests of the Ethiopian Pope at that time, Abuna Paulos, We're in the capital of Addis Ababa in Jemonde Park, or around this pool that probably was 60 feet by 30 feet. At daybreak, as Ethiopian Pope and some of the archbishops were getting ready to consecrate the water for baptismal renewal, not for baptism, but for baptismal renewal. And so we're in this fenced-in area, and then around the fenced-in area, there were about 150,000 people dressed in white. It was that image of Revelation 7. Who are these dressed white? Where are they come from? And it was certainly the largest worship service I've ever been a part of. And it amazed me how people were there to worship. And I remember commenting to one of the folk on our pilgrimage, how when people were supposed to be silent, they were silent. But then when they were supposed to say either Trisagion or the Amen, they said it together. When they were supposed to prostrate, they prostrated together. And so worship was powerful. And then also went to Holy Trinity Cathedral, which actually was the church where His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie and his wife worshiped. Their thrones are still there. And being in that space packed with hundreds of people, and that's when it clicked that this transcendence and immanence were happening together. And again, like I said, when I was in New York studying with Gebre Selassie, who's both Ethiopian trained and an American seminary trained, I came up with this way of combining both with this drone.
Of course, this is an aside because I don't want to forget to ask this question. When you looked at, and of course you know about GTS and VTS, when you look at the African diaspora at General, did you find enough?
Yeah, so on campus, I mean, General is certainly a different place now than it was in 2006 when I came. You know, there were probably maybe 10 or 12 Black students on campus, MDiv over 3 classes. And then, of course, being in New York, you know, with Harlem and the Bronx and the Brooklyn.
Yes.
That supplemented. You know, I remember during the time in my class, so in my class at General, we had 5 or 6 Black students. At the same time, I think Virginia had about the same. I'm thinking about Charles Fisher, Dennis Patterson. All of us are the same class, 2009.
I think, yeah.
So from a class standpoint, we were about equal, but certainly Virginia had more international Black students. So more students from the African diaspora than General.
And we still do. At least anecdotally, I think.
Right.
So when you go back, you chose to go to North Carolina State. Can I assume, am I assuming correctly, because of its reputation as a center of engineering studies?
So when I think about my progression, I wanted to be an astronaut. And then the Challenger happened. And I don't want to be an astronaut anymore. I remember being in, like, it must have been the 2nd grade when it exploded. And so I didn't want to be an astronaut anymore. So that's actually when I stopped drawing space shuttles. Then I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. You know, Dr. Ben Carson, you know, of late is a kind of storied individual. But as a kid growing up in the 80s, I was impressed by gifted hands. And so I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. So I'd be like Ben Carson. Then I learned you had to be in college for 12 years. And I thought, well, that's like going to kindergarten through 12, through school again. That's a long time. But when I was an 8th grade student, 2 things happened. My father told me the story of Elijah McCoy and how Elijah McCoy, engineer, went to Scotland, couldn't get a job, came back, did the oil drip cup, and how that revolutionized transportation and train work in the world, and how the oil drip cup was even used on the space shuttle. And so that connected with my childhood, in that I always took apart toys and put toys back together. and love cars. And so I connected that mechanical engineering aspect. The second thing that happened was my father took me to his good friend's home, Fanny Perry, who was assistant principal at the high school where my father taught, Bunn High School in Franklin County. And she had invited her son and two of his friends. Now, at that time, her son and two friends were in graduate school at Stanford. And her son was a graduate of NC State. Mm-hmm. And, I saw these three Black men doing great things. And so as an 8th grader, I said, I want to go to NC State to study mechanical engineering. And then I want to go to Stanford and get a PhD in mechanical engineering. And so that charted my course. Now, as a high school junior and seniors, I was looking at colleges. I looked at any number of colleges in state and out of state. But really what hooked me at NC State is that I got their most prestigious scholarship at the time called the Caldwell Scholarship, which 19 incoming students were given this academic scholarship. And so that's really one of the chief reasons with NC State, because of the opportunity that scholarship provided, student scholarship. I was able to do some study abroad at Oxford University, do some internships, and really had a wonderful community on a campus at that time, which had 25,000 students.
I see.
So that was my progression in Stanford. I didn't know it at the time, but Stanford still has a fantastic automotive design program, particularly autonomously guided vehicles. And so when I was looking to graduate in 2000, I connected with a professor there. And what I said as an 8th grader ended up working out well because I wanted an automotive focus, and Stanford made sense. So I then went to Stanford.
Okay, well, I if you don't mind my offering up, I think that prestigious scholarship should make it to your resume.
It is on my resume. I don't. It's not okay.
I'm looking at
it. Okay.
Magna is there.
Okay.
And BS in mechanical engineering in 2000.
Okay.
But I love the story of that scholarship. You were smart. You are smart. You're obviously also curious.
Very curious.
And you lived your dream by going to Stanford.
I did.
Tell me about that.
It was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. Stanford, at that time, 10% of the student body was Black. Stanford was a small school, about 14,000. And it, to some extent, it felt like an HBCU. I'm not a graduate of HBCU. And so I may be speaking out of turn, although the Black community provided an oasis in the midst of this highly rigorous academic environment. Now, what I will say about Stanford is, as far as academic rigor goes, there was much more of a communal spirit on campus. I remember talking with friends of mine who were in grad programs at Georgia Tech, at Harvard and Yale. And so the competition was so tight. I remember one student saying that as soon as a professor posted the previous year's exams in the library, students would steal them and study amongst themselves and return it after the exam. There was nothing like that at Stanford. There was such a mood and feeling of collaboration, of that we're in this together, and we all need to help each other, across racial lines. The weather was awesome there. There's such great ethnic diversity. And also, that's where I began to take religion seriously. So I mentioned I grew up in the church. As a student at NC State, it was rare that I went to church. And the times I went to church were really to ask God's help during exam period. And so I remember being a freshman, and I walked to the Church of the Good Shepherd in downtown Raleigh, right before my physics exam that Monday, because I was really scared about this exam. And so I exit the church, and seated on the sidewalk is a homeless man. And he says, "Sir, do you have any?" And before he said money, I cut my neck, put my hand around my neck, and stepped over him. I'm impressed. I'm surprised I didn't kick him. And then I walked back to campus.
You're Lazarus.
My Lazarus, that's right. I guess I'm diabetes. Then so as a senior, I began to be more religious. And the reason I started being more religious, I had great internships at NC State. The first was in Los Angeles. And as I was in LA, lived with my uncle, and there was a young college group, Christian ministry. And so I remember I hang out with them. I remember playing volleyball. And so the youth leader asked me, did I read the Bible? I said, I didn't. He said, do you study engineering? I said, absolutely. He said, how can you expect to be a good engineer if you don't study your engineering text? How can you expect to be a good Christian if you don't read the Bible? He gave an argument I could not answer. And so the next day I went out and bought a Bible and was amazed that I could get a Bible for $3 at a bookstore. I was like, this is the word of God. This should cost much more. But yet I didn't have one on me in LA. So I started reading the Bible more. And so as a senior, I'm reading Matthew 25, 39 and 40. It says, what you did not do to least of these, you did to me. And immediately that face and voice of that man that I stepped over my freshman year came to my memory. And I remember falling back in my bed and I thought, my God, what I did to that man, I did to Jesus. And so that was really my conversion moment where I started taking religion more seriously. And so I actually started going to church almost every Sunday. But when I went to Stanford, I was really scared because I thought maybe the admissions people had messed up. And somehow I gotten admitted, even though it was the next Robert, and they had just switched it up. And so I began to go to church every Sunday. And to make sure I was, I guess, rounded, I would go to St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Palo Alto, which was a white church, for that spiritual formation at 8 o'clock. And then I'd turn around at 10 o'clock and go to Jerusalem Baptist Church, which was a Black missionary Baptist church. I could see Black people, and I would be with them till about 12:30. And so that started my rhythm of spiritual formation, where I took my faith seriously.
How do you, I think we all have our individual answers to this question. I'm going to ask you, how does your technical background and your background in science inform your faith?
Yeah, it all belongs to God and nothing is wasted. What we think are curved lines are straight lines to God. I think about Psalm 139, you trace my journeys and my resting places and are acquainted with all my ways. One thing about mechanical engineering is that it teaches people how to solve problems. Now, the trap folk fall into is that, you try to solve a religious problem and you really have more questions. I think you live in the mystery with religion. But being trained as an engineer helps you think. And particularly with mechanical engineering, it teaches you how to be spatial. And one of the things that it helps out for me is with liturgy. And so when I'm designing liturgy, it's as if I'm looking at a computer at a car that I'm designing, and I can take my mouse and spin the car around how it looks like from the top, side, bottom. I do the same thing in the worship space. It's almost like I'm projected in the air and I can see the movement of people as they're happening at ground level. Practically, the way this engineering degree has helped out since my time at St. Ambrose is we launched a capital campaign 2016 to 2019. And so meeting with architects and engineers, I have a collar on and I'm sitting across from them, and then we speak the same language. I want to see the blueprints. And so they look at me and they're like, well, how do you know this? And I'll say, well, I have degrees in engineering. Oh, and so then there's respect, not that they were trying to pull something over on me, but I think that the projects were deepened because there's mutual understanding.
There's a common language.
A common language. I currently am chair of Raleigh's Stormwater Commission for the city of Raleigh, where I oversee their $12 million budget as it relates to stormwater infrastructure. And again, here I am, pastor of a congregation, leading a very technical part of the city of Raleigh. And so I bring the communal concerns of being rector of a congregation in a flood-prone area where the city of Raleigh dumped sewage for 80 years and then trash for 50, and then zoned this area during segregation for Black people to live, that still floods today. So I can bring the concerns from Rochester Heights and St. Ambrose to the Stormwater Commission that is all white except for me, and where no one except for me lives in Southeast Raleigh. Mm-hmm. And I have my engineering mindset and skill set that I bring. I recently, just last week, presented to the U.S. Water Alliance. This is a national alliance. And so there were engineers, PhDs who do water processing for Austin and Portland, Oregon and New York City. And so one gentleman who happened to be Ethiopian, after I gave my presentation, said, I have never heard a clergy person speak with such clarity and technicality, bringing engineering and communal concerns to water quality. And so that training puts me in this unique situation or unique space where I become understandable to technical folk and can help to understand how their design impacts people. And really, that's what I did as an engineer, because I'm trained as an automotive engineer, but I worked for a tire company. And going in, I didn't realize that, but going in, that was a perfect position for me, because I was the interpreter. I would tell the automotive maker like BMW and Mercedes-Benz that when you do this to your car, it's going to affect the tire this way, it's going to overall performance. What I could tell the tire designer at Michelin was, when you do this to your tire, it's going to interact with the car this way and impact the car's performance in that way. And so I was an interpreter, and I really sit in that space now, but more so from a technical and spiritual theological standpoint.
I tell you what I found, and I see a number of clergy CVs and resumes. I'll tell you what opened my eyes and a bright light shined when I saw on yours, it says environmental efforts, wetland restoration, facilities, ecological footprint upgrades, build strong online worship and social media presence. But the point is that loving God means loving our home,
right?
Being good stewards of God's resources.
Absolutely, and that, when I think about my history, and I talk about the land being personified, and being called the St. Ambrose, which is downtown but in a wetland, so it's this urban space that feels rural or distant, even though it's only a half mile from the city center and all the government buildings. There is some commonality in residents. When I was a child, they wanted to build a landfill not too far from my family's property. And the community gathered together and organized and made sure that didn't happen. It was the first time I experienced community organizing. And so that was placed elsewhere. Obviously, they tried to put it in the Black community, and the Black people said, it's not going here. So we have the land that's personified it in my family of origin that was trying to get destroyed, and people fought. Then you go to St. Ambrose, which I gave the history of the environmental degradation, and that Black community coming together to restore the wetland. The wetland is our closest neighbor at St. Ambrose. I mentioned flooding, which we're still working on that. And when we did our capital campaign, it was through an ecological lens. So we installed low E stained glass windows outside to decrease.
Say that again, low what?
Low E, so emissivity. Okay. Low -E, low emissivity stained glass, protective glass, so that it would decrease cooling costs in the summer and then decrease heating costs in the winter. We completely upgraded our water and sewer system. So now we use 80% less water. We put in water fountains that filter water so we don't have to use plastic bottles. We put in LED lights We installed 3 rain gardens, and rain gardens collect water that runs off from the roof and parking lot to make sure it doesn't run into Walnut Creek, which is the creek that runs by St. Ambrose. We install 2,000-gallon cisterns that collect rainwater and then serve as drip line irrigation for the church's property. We did a new columbarium and a new Ethiopian inspired labyrinth. Both are permeable, so all the water soaks into the ground instead of running off. And we did this to educate not only our folk, but the community, and to increase our ecological footprint and to try to be good stewards. And those considerations meant that our capital campaign had to be more, because low E glass is way more expensive than just regular plexiglass to protect the stained glass windows. And we thought it was important as Christians, as we live out our faith, to do those things, because it was the right thing to do, even though it was the more expensive thing to do.
Do you write about this, by the way?
It's on our website. So on our website under environmental efforts, all that is there, including some videos.
But what I meant about that was teaching the theology of environmentalism.
Yes. So just last week, I was at the University of the South, and I received their award for social justice and environmentalism. Even though I have no connection with Sewanee at all, I'm not alumnus of that institution. They decided to give me their environmental efforts, and several national organizations and magazines such as Root and Vine have written about the work we've done, the American rivers. And yes, a theological standpoint, you know, I look at, so I tell the story of St. Ambrose from an ecological lens. I talk about it in terms of 4 dispensations, and we're living in the 4th dispensation. The first is when the area was pristine. This was before European engagement. The second is European engagement, where the city of Raleigh began dumping raw sewage. The third was when the city zoned this area for Black people to live, and it was the Black residents who helped bring wholeness to the environment. And now we're living in the 4th dispensation, where the environment, we're inviting the environment to help heal the Black community. And the way that we're doing this is that St. Ambrose last year received the Episcopal Church's Creation Care Grant. We are starting a project called the Healing Pod, where we are using horticultural therapy and therapeutic gardens to meet the emotional and mental health concerns of the larger Black community. So that's that 4th dispensation. The environment is being used to heal the people. But when we look at the Ash Wednesday liturgy, you know, God who hates nothing you created.
Yeah.
When we in the litany in the repentance, repent of the ills done against the earth. I mean, really, that is the space in which we live. Now, I think St. Ambrose is, because we didn't cause this. It's not Black people who messed it up, but Black people who are cleaning it up. And giving rise to the creation. So yeah, it's part of our story, and it's an important story to have.
And we have been disproportionately negatively affected by it, obviously.
Absolutely.
Now, what motivated you to go back home? Do you see St. Ambrose as returning home?
Oh, absolutely. It's returning home. It was returning home because I'm from the area. Although as a college student, I didn't know St. Ambrose existed. If I had, I perhaps would have attended. So yeah, my journey back to Raleigh was interesting. Once I graduated seminary, I went to St. Michael and All Angels, Dallas, Texas, as a part of their Lilly Transition to Ministry program. And enjoyed my time there. I was in 3 areas at St. Michael and All Angels where I was in charge of young adult ministry. I was in a mostly Spanish-speaking Jubilee Park community using outdoor liturgy as a means of evangelism. I was chaplain to the community. And then I was at St. Philip's Episcopal School Elementary, which was historically Black Episcopal school, where I was chaplain there once a day. And the beauty about St. Philip's is, even though it was an elementary school, 100% of the students graduate high school and 98% graduate college, as proof that when you lock it in early, it stays. So at the end of my Lilly program, I began searching, and I looked at several congregations in Boston, Chicago, and Atlanta. And the way I approached this at that time was new ministry meant new place to live. And Chicago, Boston, and Atlanta were all exciting places for me. I remember getting a call from now Bishop Hunn, which was Canon Hunn at that time in North Carolina, saying, Jemonde, we want you to look at St. Ambrose. And I told him I really was not interested in St. Ambrose. And he said, well, go out and interview. So I flew to Raleigh, and in all honesty, it was a free trip home to see my parents and my sister.
Sure.
So I go to Raleigh to interview, and it was a 3-day interview. And so I'm leading worship for the search committee, which was the vestry, which was the Wednesday Eucharistic service. And the vestry member, who is now my senior warden currently, was reading the psalm. And I'm sitting there in the presider's chair, the president's chair, and I hear God say, this is your church. And I said, okay, this is my church. Now, before going to Raleigh, I had been given an offer by a large Episcopal church in Atlanta. And all I had to do was to sign the letter of agreement, send it back, and I was good to go. So I already had a job, ministry call when I went to Raleigh.
Was this a predominantly Black Episcopal church?
No, it was predominantly white, but I would say probably a quarter were Black, mostly Caribbean, and Black American, but still.
It wasn't Holy Innocents, was it?
No, this was St. Luke's. This was St. Luke's, Atlanta. Dan Matthews.
Oh, where Winnie is.
Where Winnie is now, yes. Where Winnie is now. That's St. Luke's.
Okay.
And so I go home, I go back to Dallas, and I called the rector and I said, I know you have this letter of agreement. How long is this? Can you keep this open? And he says, I can give you a week. I called the chair of the search committee at St. Ambrose and said, I'm in discernment. How long before you will know? She says 6 weeks, because I had to interview 3 more people.
Wow.
So I called the rector back in Atlanta, and I'm like, well, can you extend that? He said, you got a week. And I said, I'm going to have to decline. He says, where are you going? I said, I don't know. I was so embarrassed by this decision that I only told my spiritual director. I did not tell my parents. I did not even tell the rector of the church where I was serving in Dallas, Texas, because I thought, Jemonde, if this does not pan out, you just look stupid.
Now, let me ask, were you married at the time?
No, I was single. I was not married at the time. No.
Okay.
That certainly would have changed some things. Perhaps. I mean, certainly would have had a conversation partner. But I was not married at the time.
Okay.
And so then, 5 weeks later, I get the call from Ms. Edna Rich Ballantyne, who invites me to be rector. And so it works out. So even my going to St. Ambrose was not something I sought. I actually rejected it early. I had a profound experience with God during the interview process, so much so that it caused me to say no to a position I already had in my pocket. And here I am. And I've been here 10 years, and it's been beautiful ministry. When I think about St. Ambrose, my greatest joy is told in this story. So the exchange of the peace is an extrasensory experience at St. Ambrose with people hugging, and all this is pre-pandemic. And normally during the exchange of the peace, I will go down the center aisle to give the peace and then return on one of the side aisles. But for some reason this Sunday, I went to a side aisle first, the gospel side, the right side. And as I'm going to give the peace on the side aisle, I see 2 8-year-old boys, Black boys, running down the aisle. And they're running down the aisle. They're holding hands, and they stop in front of this Ethiopian icon. Now, at that time, when I came to St. Ambrose, the Stations of the Cross were blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. And there was just this disconnect. You got a
Yeah.
black church, but Jesus
Yeah.
is white. And so
Yeah.
I commissioned this Ethiopian iconographer out of New Hampshire, DC, Christian Gosi, to do a Station of the Cross in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. And as far as we know, St. Ambrose is the only church in the world that has Station of the Cross in the Ethiopic tradition, because stations are not part of the Ethiopian tradition. Mm-hmm. And certainly churches that have stations don't have the Ethiopian icons. Mm-hmm. And so they're running down the aisle and they stop in front of the 12th Station of the Cross, which is Jesus dying on the cross. At that time, that was the only Ethiopian icon we had in the church, because as he would commission, as he finished these icons, we'd pull white Jesus down and put black Jesus up. So they ran past 5 other white Jesuses. They stop in front of this one. And the church member says to this black boy, both black, who it's his first time there, he says, "See, Jesus looks just like you." What a profound theological statement. Not that you look like Jesus, but that Jesus like you, that the divine imprint is in you. I wish I had that realization as an 8-year-old. I don't think I came to that realization until I was in my mid to late 20s. And so when I think about my ministry at St. Ambrose and my ministry in general, I would say that in addition to creating a space that gives people a deeper experience of God, behind that is the work I do around disrupting white supremacy. As a matter of fact, I use this term whiteousness. I get this from a friend of mine, Mark Dukes, who painted the St. Gregory of Nyssa icons in San Francisco, African-American. He has the series of saints he calls Saint Sambo. And Saint Sambo is wrapped in whiteousness. It's a compound word of white and righteousness. And when I look at what we do at the Episcopal Church and Western Christianity, is basically all wrapped in whiteousness. And what happened in that moment with those 2 black kids is that they were unwrapped from whiteousness and wrapped in righteousness, is that they had a clearer view of what I call the biblical Jesus and not the white supremacist Jesus of Western Christianity. And so when I talk about Ethiopia being the spiritual home for Christians of the African diaspora, it's real. When I talk about the work we do at St. Ambrose of the unsuturing or decoupling of white supremacy and Christianity, it's real. And so the integration of those things, Ethiopian in the liturgy, of lifting up service music that's based on Negro spirituals, that one of your professors, Dr. Bill Roberts, transcribed for us for our 150th anniversary in 2018 from the work that our rector in 1925 wrote, Arthur Myron Cochran, based on Negro spirituals. All of that is we use to give people an identity, to give people an opportunity to deepen their identity in God, where they can bring themselves and not have to leave anything behind. Episcopal News Service last year, February 2021, did a wonderful article on that, on the disruption of white supremacy in the liturgy at St. Ambrose, and they interviewed the father of that gentleman, of the boy I talked about. They interviewed some people at St. Ambrose who grew up in Trinidad and now attend St. Ambrose. So.
And is that the title of the article? The disruption?
No, the title of the article is, and I'm just going off memory, African American Episcopal Congregation Embraces African and African American Roots. Let me, matter of fact.
And how did you find Bill Roberts, by the way?
Through Joyce Corbin Cunningham.
Oh, yeah.
So, here's the title. The title is Historically Black Raleigh Church Emphasizes African American and African Culture at Its Essence. Now, I can just put this in the chat box, if you can grab it.
Oh, excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, so perfect. Thank you. What's next for you?
Right now, I am
So,
one of 5 candidates.
So how old are you?
44.
Right. Shank of life. Oh, that was 44. All right. So what's next for you? You were about to say?
So right now, I'm one of 5 candidates on the slate for Bishop of the Diocese of New York. That election is December 3rd. We will see what happens. If called to be bishop, my same ministry focus that I've been doing since my ordained life, my vision is to bring that to the Diocese of New York from a deepening of spirituality standpoint to a disrupting of white supremacy standpoint to an ecological standpoint. We talked about theology and creation care. What I would love to see in that diocese, there are 5 watersheds that lead to the Atlantic Ocean. What would it look like to realign the diocese around God's boundaries, which are these watersheds, instead of just arbitrarily drawing geographical lines, and then connect that theologically to the importance of water in the liturgy, in baptism, which is obvious, but also in the communion. We have that great prayer from, I guess it's Athanasius, maybe it's Cyprian, that, in the mystery of this Holy Communion, this water, which represents our humanity, Jesus humbling himself to take on our humanity so that we can partake in his divinity. So around both Eucharist and baptism, the importance of water, and then connecting that in the larger watershed. What the New York flood map shows is that by the year 2100, many important Episcopal churches in Manhattan will be flooded, such as St. Luke in the Fields, Manhattan, such as St. Joseph's in the Bronx. And I feel that if we work together with government and nonprofits, we can change that narrative and change that tide.
St. Luke's in the Fields, is that in the village? In
the village, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unimaginable for me to think now that that church will be flooded in 80 years.
Sure.
It's just inconceivable. And, if we don't change, it will happen.
Right. Well, I will hold that search up in prayer.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy living in New York?
Oh, I loved it. For my seminary classmates, they would always joke that by the time I would show up for morning prayer at 8 o'clock, I'd already been to Harlem and Brooklyn and back. I had the reputation of not always, but being off the close a lot. Certainly, I would say from my class, and maybe any of the 3 MDiv classes there, I was the one who was out and about the most. They had this statement that the close is all consuming, that people get there and they just wouldn't leave. They may go across the street, but wouldn't leave. Well, I had the opposite view. I had 3 years in New York, and I'm going to take advantage. Yeah. And plus, for my sanity, because of the whiteness of general and the whiteness of any, including Virginia. Right. I had to get out to be with some people who look like me and to experience culture other than that which was highlighted on the close. Was Tim Boggs in your class by any chance? He was not. He was class of 07. Okay. But he was there at the same time. We were there at the same time. Yeah, we practiced law in the same area for many years. Okay. Mm-hmm. And he's up in Maine now. Right. What about your cultural life? What do you enjoy? Love music. I talked about music from my formative years. I play trumpet. The first instrument my father taught me was an auto harp, this folk instrument. I have a mini auto harp, which is the auto harp I played as a kid, and I have now introduced my 3-year-old daughter to the mini auto harp and trying to teach her how to play that. Enjoy live music. I'm classically trained as trumpet, love jazz. I love North African jazz, which is this almost Ambrosian infusion of liturgical music. And I'm working with my minister of music. My dream one day is to write a St. Ambrose mass settings. I know a St. Ambrose mass setting already exists, but a St. Ambrose Raleigh mass setting that's this combination of jazz and really Middle Eastern music. Because when I think about Ambrosian chant and think about the music in East Africa, to me, it sounds like North African jazz. Love art. I'm always proud that Romare Bearden, was baptized at St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church in Charlotte.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And if you go to Carolina Panther Stadium, the park beside it is Bearden Park. But St. Michael and All Angels stood where the 50-yard line is at Panther Stadium. And so the church was moved so that the diocese could sell this property. And now we're talking about reparations to right that wrong, or restitution, in the diocese. I'm fascinated by capoeira, this African Brazilian martial arts form that infuses history, music, and agility. I feel like when I am practicing capoeira, that it is a spiritual experience, that the ancestors are here. Of course, I love traveling. I love food. My spouse is a fantastic cook, and we enjoy being foodies and trying new restaurants and trying new food. And of course, with being the father of 2 young children, spending time with them and seeing the world through their eyes. Particularly with my daughter, as we talk about astronomy, I was able to point out to her the planet Mars last night and the moon, and talk about some constellations, and she picked them out. So it's just great. I feel like,
and if she's 3, she's talking a blue streak.
She's talking a blue streak. So my dream was to be a father, so that I could be a good daddy, like my father was a good daddy, and I'm living in that space. One of my visions for that land that I talked about, where my mother lives, is within the next 20 years, I want to set up an Ethiopian Episcopal retreat center on that space, a retreat center that brings aspects of both Ethiopian Orthodoxy and Episcopal aspects, with a nod to Black people. And I came to this because I take a retreat each year at a monastery, and normally I'm the only Black person there. And I feel that the benefit I receive from going to spaces like that should be open to a larger Black population. And so having a retreat center with that as its mission on this ancestral land is a vision I've had for the past decade, and hope to make that real before I turn 70.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I have to say a couple of things to you. One of the reasons we're talking today is that I saw something on YouTube. I don't know how I got it, and I don't remember, but it stunned me, because there you were talking about what I have come to, an area that I've come to enjoy and be fascinated by, which is the history of your parish.
Okay.
And its relationship to the whiteness around it.
Yep.
And you presented as a scholar. Clearly, as a result of this conversation, you are a scholar.
Well, thank you. That's kind.
It's not being kind, it's the truth. And for that reason, you are rare. Whether or not we're talking about race.
Gotcha. Yeah.
What we've discovered, what I've discovered since I took on this position, part-time position, was not part-time at all, of growing the collection of African-American history records and oral histories at Virginia Seminary is the proliferation of stories about the histories of institutions. White parishes particularly beginning to come to terms with how they became white churches in the first place.
Right.
And it is astonishing.
It's
one, that they're doing it, but second, how universal the story is.
It is. Yeah. It's the operation of whiteness and white supremacy. I mean, once you tap into that stream, I mean, it just flows.
Right. But my concern, not fear, I'm not afraid, but my concern is that those stories will overwhelm what it is that we do.
Right.
But those stories have to be told.
That's true.
All the time.
Right.
We have about 7 minutes left, but I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you don't mind, to talk about what I have not asked you. What did you expect to talk about today that has not come up? But you would like to include in the record?
Your questions have been appropriate. Certainly when you first reached out, I thought I was talking more about St. Ambrose, and you said, no, it's more about me. So that was clear coming in. I feel like we've covered, what it was like, growing up spiritually. Maybe from a race standpoint, I remember it being 1982 and the Klan marching through my hometown. And I remember the next week, Lewisburg. I remember the next week, the NAACP gathered together and we marched through our downtown. And the Klan marched from north to south, and then the NAACP marched south to north. I remember coming to this hill, which as a kid was such a tall hill. Once you crested this hill, St. Matthias Church was down on the right. We're walking up this hill, and I'm just tired. And my father picks me up and puts me on his shoulders, and he walks the rest of the way. So I think about these formative moments. My father in the woods, teaching me about nature, the Klan marching, and then the counter march in NAACP, the emphasis on Emancipation Day growing up. So when I was a kid, January 1 was New Year's Day, but it was also Emancipation Day. Indeed. And we went to the Presbyterian Church that was founded in 1867, and we had Emancipation Day. We celebrated and this is what we did. Of not having to be taught, lift their voice and sing, but you just sing it so much, you know it. That the importance of the Black community in my formation, spiritually and culturally, and even with that formation, it wasn't until I saw a Black priest at the altar that I said I could do that. And so it's made me think of late, not only the importance of culture, but I guess what I would call cultural incarnation. And that's the
second time this morning you've mentioned incarnation.
Yeah, and if there is not this incarnational experience, then depths are not reached. So just last night, so at St. Ambrose, we're doing this Wednesday night Bible study called Episcopal, what it means to be Black and Episcopal. And last night we talked about preaching in the Black Episcopal tradition. So we looked at Blessed Absalom Jones' 1808 sermon, and then we looked at Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney's sermon on holy Blackness. And it struck me how both Absalom Jones and Will Gaffney use incarnation in their sermons. Absalom Jones talked about just as Jesus came down in winter, so God came down this winter into the Congress and said that the slave trade is illegal. And then Will Gaffney talked about a Christ, a God who comes down in Advent, to a brown Christ who comes down in Advent to liberate all people. And so I think, as I think about theologically, the certainly Christology. So when people ask me, what is the issue with the Western church, I say it's Christology. And it's not from a high or low Christology, Christ from above or Christ below, but to whom are we forming Christians?
Yeah.
To a Western ideal of Christ or to a biblical ideal of Christ?
Yeah.
And I think now of the past 6 months, I've been thinking about the importance of incarnation in that Christological argument. And that if the Christology is off, you can't have the incarnation. And that also the Christology can give birth to an incarnational experience that continues to be wrapped in righteousness. So how can, what question I'm asking myself now is, how can we both reimagine Christology and then make sure that there is the incarnation, that this bridge, which is, the old adage goes, if you can't see it, you can't be it, because that's extraordinarily important.
Proverbs. I spend a great deal of my time studying, and I've written about August Wilson, who asked the question repeatedly, how can the enslaved worship the same God as the enslaver?
Right. Right.
Over and over again. I don't have the answer, but I don't have answers about God.
Right.
I can't be that presumptuous.
Right. Right.
One other question, two questions. What is your wife's name? How long have you been married, and where's she from?
My wife's name is Jemonde Taylor. She was born in Kershaw County, South Carolina. Growing up, she spent time in Orange County, California, and even some time in Tokyo because her mother was an industrial engineer with an automotive focus. Imagine that. And then she marries me, who automotive engineer. But really, from elementary, growing up in Rockingham County, North Carolina, but from middle school on, she grew up in Rocky Mount, Nash County, which is about 30 miles from Lewisburg. Growing up, I always said I wanted me a Rocky Mount girl, because in high school, we thought Rocky Mount had the prettiest girls. And so I ended up marrying a Rocky Mount girl, although when we met, she was living in Greensboro and I was living in Raleigh. She is Senior Vice President of Human Resources, has spent her entire professional career in human resources. And we have two children, Kaylee Marie Taylor and Caleb Jordan Taylor. Kaylee Marie is named after her mother. My wife is Kirsten Lee, so that's the letter K and then Lee, so Kaylee Marie. And then Marie is Kirsten's great-grandmother, who taught her how to cook. So it's interesting, both of our children are named after their great-grandparents. Kaylee Marie named after Joy Marie, Alan Dalton, and then Caleb Jordan Taylor named after Jordan Thomas.
And how old is Caleb?
He's 1 year.
1 year.
Yeah. So their birthdays are 4 days apart. My daughter is August 25th. My son is August 21st. 4 days apart, but a 2-year difference.
Right. A 2-year split in different genders. That's a good thing.
That's right.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. My brother is 2 years older than I am, and we'll be friends unconditionally one day.
One day, right? One day. Right.
Well, listen, thank you so much. You've been more than generous with your time. And I hope that you don't mind. I may have to come back to you at some point and ask a few more questions.
That's fine.
I am very excited about the prospect that you might be Bishop of New York. I know something about that diocese and who has been bishop in that diocese. And the glories of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine.
I've spent a lot of time meditating on Walter Dennis of blessed memory.
Yes, yes. This will not be the last time you and I have a conversation. But thank you
I
so
feel the
much,
same.
Reverend Taylor. It's been a
Thank you.
delight. It's been a privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.